What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Hangover. I'm Daniel. Alongside with me is Shannon, as always. Shannon, how you doing, man? How was your weekend? It's the first day of July. How was your last weekend of June?
Oh, we had a really nice weekend, and as we always say, weekends go by so fast. I was looking back, and I'm like, well, we did a lot and accomplished a lot, but it did. I can't even remember half of it because it went by so fast.
I agree. I'm the same way. I ended up, I was telling my wife, I was like, man, it's already like at the end of Saturday. I was like, it's already Saturday. That means Sunday is just around the corner. And then it'll be Monday, which will get us a day closer to training camp. The Steelers are scheduled to take on training camp next month or so, or this month, actually. How excited are you for training camp? I know there's not much news that have gone on since then. Do you think anybody's going to show up in a helicopter or in a hot air balloon or anything like that?
I think that's teams that are more established. All those Steeler teams were considered contenders going into the season. At least for the division, if not a Super Bowl contender. And so you had all the people getting creative and it's fun. But I think this is going to be a little bit more low key, a little bit more focused, a little bit more get to know everybody. So I wouldn't expect anything too extravagant.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think that there isn't that big personality yet on the team. I think that there are some guys that could become those big personalities if they have the right ear, but I don't think anybody has proven anything to come in and command such an entrance, so to speak. But one of the players that, maybe perhaps could one day acquire that attention is George Pickens. And there was a report from, I believe it was Ray Fittipaldo, questioning whether or not the Steelers were that high on George Pickens, if they might bring him back at the end of this year, or is this, search into the market for wide receivers a clue to the Steelers not convinced on George Pickens? Where do you think the Steelers lie on George right now?
I think everybody's unproven until proven otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that he is great at contested catches, making down the field plays, big plays, but they still is a question mark whether he can be a true number one. Can he run a complete route tree? Can he defeat, double teams? I mean, I remember AB, Hines Ward being double teamed and still figuring out a way to get open to catch passes. And that's something that, we're going to have to see. Can he do? That's why I think this is such an important year for George Pickens. This is a prove it year. And I think the Steelers are hoping that he does prove to be a wide receiver one. And I don't think they'll have any problem paying him like a wide receiver one if he comes out and proves it this year.
I don't disagree with you. I think that this is going to be a huge year for him. Obviously, this is his last year going. It'll be going into his, what is this, his fourth year?
This will be his third year.
Third year, but he'll be able to.
He still has 1 year in the contract, but this is where they want to do an extension after this year, if possible. Yes.
Right, because at this point it'd probably be a lot less expensive than trying to do this next year. I mean, as much as the cap or the cost of wide receivers continues to go up year after year, but I do echo what you're saying there. I think that this is going to be a huge year for George Pickens. He's going to have to show himself. Last year with Mason Rudolph in there, he did take his game up to another level. Now, I would expect that Russell Wilson probably would be a better quarterback than Mason Rudolph. As good as Mason was, I would expect Russell to be better. And so I have a high expectation for both of these guys. Speaking of Russ, there was a video here earlier of him throwing balls to DK Metcalf. Kind of started some rumblings there. If somebody does come in, what does that do to George? Does that make him number two?
No, I don't think that the Steelers are really interested in bringing in anybody that is already to displace Pickens as your number one going into this year. It would have to be an established, proven number one. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, that is going to cost too much in capital and in salary. So I think the Steelers are content with what they got for the most part. They might bring in, a lower price free agent or even a trade. But I don't expect them to go after one of the big top guys like everybody was hoping for earlier in the offseason. I think George Pickens is the wide receiver one, and I think that's what the Steelers want. That's what George Pickens wants, and I think it'd be best for everybody if he could develop that rapport with Russell Wilson like he had with Mason Rudolph, because you've seen a totally different player when Mason Rudolph was on the field.
I agree. Even when he wasn't getting targets, like against the, I believe it was the Baltimore Ravens, he ended up not with a single target, and yet he was out there contributing, blocking, looked to be a part of the team, responding when the team scored. It was a complete night and day difference. I'm excited about this team, though. I mean, it's not just the quarterback, it's the offensive coordinator situation as well, the game plan, the philosophy. I think last season going into the year, I think everybody was disappointed in the way that the offense was ran because of how many big guys that the Steelers had and weren't utilizing, in the proper way, in my opinion. It was too predictable. If there was big guys in there, they ran the ball. They rarely spread them out, which was something that I thought they had the capability of doing last year with the players that were on the team. This year, I'm excited to see how Arthur Smith will be able to utilize the tight ends, especially. I think that Pat Freiermuth might end up being that wide receiver number 2 in this offense, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that if he can get somewhere around, 75 catches or so, I think that would be good. Where do you think that Pat has to be a respectable or a good number 2 there option for Russell Wilson?
Well, considering how Arthur Smith likes to use his top tight end, I'm saying 70 to 80 receptions. I might be in the minority here, but I think that Darnell Washington is going to take a huge step forward. No pun intended, because he is a big man. But I expect him anywhere from 20 to 40 catches, somewhere in that range. But a lot of stuff on the move, down the seams, across the middle, where he can use his size and his, really incredible athleticism and speed to be as big as he is. He's going to be very tough to tackle once he catches the ball. I remember Gentry, who was even taller than Washington, but not as big, obviously. But he ran like a baby giraffe. We used to talk about it and laugh about it. But he'd catch the ball, and then he'd start that gangly running down the field. Washington moves more like a large wide receiver. And they just did not utilize him at all last year. They didn't know how to utilize CA3, the Calvin Austin. There was a lot of weapons they had, as you said, that they just didn't utilize. And you could tell what they were going to run by what package they had in. I think you're going to see a total difference in Arthur Smith's offense in the usage of play action, misdirection, his personnel packages. He might show one thing and do something else. That's the modern game. The 49ers are excellent at doing that, and so's Detroit, teams like that. So I think we're going to see a more modern approach.
I sure do hope so. I think
I pray, yes.
and I think Pat Freiermuth has been one that came out recently and spoke about, last year's offense. I think he spoke on some other platforms mentioning that, there was a lot of tails, meaning it was predictable. And that in this offense, there's not so much tells. It's there seems to be a reason to the madness, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So before, when Matt Canada, when you watch the plays, it was just like him throwing plays at a wall and see what stuck. You know what I mean? But then when you watch, like, for instance, other teams, and especially when some of these major broadcasters would break down things about their offensive coordinator, they would show how an offensive coordinator would utilize one formation or one look, and then work it one way and then utilize it again and work it a different way to beat the defense. And that was never happening with the Steelers. If it worked one way, they continued to do it until it didn't work anymore. And unfortunately, it only sometimes worked once, and then that was it. And then they still kept trying to do it. But that's enough of that. With Arthur Smith, I'm excited. I think that this is definitely going to be a more run dominant offense. I know that we're looking at the wide receiver 2 and who's going to be there. But I think at the end of the day, we're looking at, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. I'm hoping, with 2,500 yards combined, I think that's possible. I mean, all-purpose yards.
Mhm.
I think that's very much possible with those two guys. And I think if the Steelers can end up doing that, that says a couple of things. One, that the offensive line is doing what they're supposed to do, and two, that the Steelers are maintaining possession of the ball, which is going to be huge for this defense. Because let's be honest, the defense played a lot last year, especially in the first part of the season.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to those things. Russell Wilson, I think he's going to be the starter. I think he's going to hold it down for the entire year. There's been a lot of talks whether or not the Steelers are going to extend Justin Fields this year or this offseason. Do you see any of that happening this year? Do you think that the Steelers are legitimately going to just look in for this year without any plan for the future at quarterback?
Well, I think they are hoping that one of these two guys really work out, or they both work out, and give them options. But until they prove it, you would be jumping the gun trying to extend somebody, and then you're liable because all these contracts now have all this guaranteed money, and quarterback contracts are huge. So I think that they're going to roll the dice, take their chances that one or both will have successful seasons, that they'll prove that they have potential to be the next franchise guy, and that they're going to like it in Pittsburgh. They're going to like playing for Mike Tomlin. They're going to like playing in this Arthur Smith's offense. And then next year, in the next offseason, they will figure out what they're going to have to do as far as salary and hopefully pay George Pickens and make a decision on Cameron Heyward. So there's going to be a lot of financial decisions coming up. But this is a prove-it year for a lot of guys.
I agree. It definitely is. And this could end up being an offseason, not this year, but the next one that could be very expensive for the Pittsburgh Steelers if everything goes well, which is a good problem to have. If everybody's expensive, that means that the Steelers did very well this season.
Yep.
You brought up Cam Heyward. Mark Caboli reported earlier that Heyward is not optimistic that a deal will get done, which will lead to him possibly becoming a free agent in 2025. Do you think this is more Cam trying to get a deal done, with that whole Browns talk that he talked about not too long ago? Or do you really think that this is a possibility that Cam could enter the 2025 season a free agent and maybe perhaps this might be his last year as a Steeler?
Well, he needs to enter next offseason as a free agent because, in my opinion, coming off the type of injury that he had and the severity of that injury at his age, and we'd already seen a little bit of a decline in his pass rush ability, which was one of the things that made him special. I think that leadership is great, but how much can you afford to pay for leadership when you don't have a franchise quarterback on his payroll? You're going to have to pay George Pickens. You got to make decisions on some of these other guys. Top contending teams do not overpay for old defensive line talent. It has to be a peaceful medium. And I've said all along, they're not trying to keep his money from him. I think he's due $22 million. Let him play out the season. He acted like he did not want to do that, and I understand. But he backtracked that whole Cleveland Browns stuff. He backtracked real fast and said his wife almost threw up when she heard it. I about did myself. So don't threaten me with the Browns. You might threaten with a lot of teams. So I'll go to Kansas City, or don't threaten with the Browns. That's a joke. Or you're insane because you're going to throw your legacy away for a couple million more a year, let's say. No, it doesn't make any sense. Now, if you're going to play for a Super Bowl, I wish him well. But hopefully the Steelers can be a contender this year. But, I don't think that the way the Steelers are right now, the best thing they do is just play out this year. Let it be a proven year for Cam as well. And even then, if he has a big year this year, the older we get, the more likelihood injuries happen. So I still wouldn't be backing the Brinks truck up, let's put it that way. Because, again, the guaranteed money part, that we see how that works out for a lot of teams, and it handcuffs them for a while, especially with older players.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I would hate to see Cam in another uniform, and we got to look at who the general manager is. And it's Omar Khan. He's been known as the finance guy, the guru. does the checks and balances. And I'm not sure if you can see the value in a defensive tackle of his age with the injuries that you referred to as well coming off last season. So I do find it's probably something that's going to be a little bit more difficult. I do think that if Cam were to show up and play very well, that the Steelers wouldn't be opposed to extending him at the end of the season if be so. I think that there's probably going to be some context to that contract, perhaps not something that's going to be 3 years fully guaranteed, as I'm sure he would want. It's probably going to have, I wouldn't be surprised if he did get a contract extension after this season, if it didn't have more than 1 year guaranteed, just because of his age and the way his injuries that have gone by, maybe something that is completely incentive based, but at the same time, you don't want to, embarrass or disrespect the guy too, but it's going to be tough, man. It's going to be a tough decision to make, because at the end of the day, I think that if this team had a Super Bowl possible contending team, I think bringing back Cam for the next year, 2 years or so is a no-brainer, but there's some big questions on this team, especially on the quarterback position. And I'm not sure, where they're at yet. We're not going to know until probably about halfway through the season.
It affects everybody's value.
It does.
If they have if let's say Russell Wilson looks like he's got 3 years left and he looks like he's the answer, and, so far, he's so good. He's fitting in well, no problems. He loves Tomlin. All you hear is praise from the players. Let's say he looks, man, this is like when Peyton Manning went to Denver, and it just was like a rebirth. It rejuvenated his whole career. If it's Russell Wilson, and let's say they want to do a 2-3 year contract, that, as you say, will raise Cam Heyward's value, because you want that veteran leadership, stability. You need that on your defense. It has more value because you're a Super Bowl contender. But if you don't have a quarterback after this year, you got to find one. And guys, it's going to be expensive. Whether it's a trade, whether it's a draft pick, you're going to have to give up capital. So everything really hinges on the success this year of whether they actually find their next possible franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. And, there's no way of telling anytime soon. They're going to have to go through training camp. They're going to have to go through preseason and probably much of the regular season to determine whether or not they got a viable answer long-term at the quarterback position. Even if it is the backup Justin Fields, I think that if Russell Wilson is showing, that he's capable of being a number one quarterback, even if Justin Fields is showing, better value as a backup, I think they're going to give Russ the full year if he's doing okay.
Yeah,
and then I think that it'll be a huge. We'll figure out what it is that the Steelers want to do after the season. If Russ has a good year and they still decide to go with Justin, that just kind of tells you that Justin had a great year as a backup and showing some things and progressing and developing in the right direction. So only time will tell on that.
It would have to be, again, unless they get him in some specialty packages like I hope they do. They need to see in practice and a camp and preseason, he's going to have to show flashes of, okay, he's progressing better. He's making his reads better. He's in a better situation now than he was in Chicago, no doubt. And
100%.
Lower expectations. Sometimes that's what a quarterback needs, because he's one man and teams want him to be a savior. And the Bears were wanting that. And they really didn't put the team around him to allow him to do that. Mm-hmm. Or the coaching staff. But the coaching staff is drastically improved this year, not just at OC. So I'm expected to see the Steelers reap the benefits of these additions this year.
I do too. We've already heard, rumors of a special formation with Justin Fields called the Death Star, with some running back options out there. Be interesting to see how that works. I'm sure if that formation shows to be very successful every time it's deployed and it's successful in multiple facets, whether it's handing off to one of the running backs or Justin Fields taking it off himself or throwing it to a receiver, if it continues to be successful at certain points, Tomlin's going to ask himself whether this is the personnel that needs to be on the field. But
if you look at the talent they have to run that play,
mm-hmm.
But I still go back and I can't get the image out of my head of some of these blocks that Jaylen Warren has thrown in his career.
Mhm.
And the one last year he threw to spring Calvin Austin III on a sweep to get him in the end zone. Imagine Justin Fields with his athleticism or Russell Wilson. We got to remember Russell Wilson's not a statue.
Mhm.
He can move. And let Harris and Warren lead the way and let Warren and Harris just decleat somebody and pave the way. You know, in the red zone, that could be huge. And the Steelers have struggled so mightily and left so many possible scoring opportunities on the field because of their lack of creativity and the lack of that special talent to, that they needed to get that ball into the end zone. Guys who score a lot of touchdowns usually have the special tendencies,
Mhm.
and they're very effective at the goal line. And the Steelers have struggled to even get down there. So I do expect, those formations to be run, and not only with Fields, but also Wilson.
I agree. I do agree. I think that the mobility aspect of the quarterback position is going to play a huge role this year. That's been something that Coach Tomlin has been harping on for a few years now, since Ben Roethlisberger was a quarterback. And I think that now they got a couple of guys that are definitely mobile. I'm not saying that Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky weren't. I just think that these guys are they're definitely more athletic, and I think more comfortable in that position of having to use their athleticism to get down the field and or to make something happen.
Yeah, Canada didn't have the creativity.
Yeah, he didn't have.
I mean, it was, again, you felt sorry for the guys. You would see them go up to the line before they snapped the ball, and they had no confidence. They had no confidence that play was going to work. They never altered the cadence, the snap count. They didn't speed it up. They didn't slow it down. If anything, they repetitively snapped the ball with 1 second. When you snap the ball with 1 second on the clock, they're pinning their ears back. You should have a variance there. And if formations, you said, was so predictable, just certain little things like that is going to make it much tougher to defend this year.
Oh, yeah. And the only reason they had to wait for every second is because they were only on the field for 3 plays, and they needed to give the break for the defense.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break, guys. When we get back, we're going to continue this conversation. Don't go anywhere. Just got a few words from our sponsors. And we're back, guys. Welcome back to the Hangover. I'm Daniel. Alongside with me is Shannon. Before we get back in the conversation, I want to remind you guys to go check out SteelCurtainNetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Make sure you're not missing any up-to-date news. There's a trade watch going on, so you can go check it out there. And while you're there, check out all the other podcasts that are out there that are audio only. For instance, mine that aired out on Friday, talking about some predictions that I made, whether it was a 53 and or the lineup that I think the Steelers will start off in against the Falcons. Much too early prediction, but go check that out and let me know what you guys think. Going back into like the quarterback position and what we spoke about, I know we haven't talked in a week, and since then there was a report that it came out about a former quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Kenny Pickett, not necessarily him, but somebody from his party, his quarterback coach, kind of giving some saying that there's some comments about his departure and that the Steelers kind of did him dirty a little bit. To me, it seems a little bit kind of whiny and complaining still about the situation, but I do think that they're trying to clean up his image. I don't think, leaving a team with the notion that you quit on a competition is good for anybody's image. So I don't really put too much weight into it. What do you think about those comments that were made?
Well, I think that I just look at the overall evidence. I know that Kenny Pickett was the number 1 draft pick, and they did not put him in a position to be successful because they retained Matt Canada. And I'll go down with the ship on this one. I'm like the captain on the Titanic. I'll go right down with the ship. And I think that we as fans were not privy to the truth in a lot of situations. And I'll just use the latest quarterback situation. We were told that it was going to be a fair quarterback competition, and Pickett was going to be able to compete, and with Russell Wilson, and they'd already told Rudolph they were going to bring him back. They were interested in bringing him back, and then they ended up signing Wilson, and then they took the deal off the table to Rudolph, and then they tell Pickett, after telling him he was going to have a chance to compete, that no, it's Russell's job. And I think that a lot of stuff was mishandled in that whole situation. I don't care anymore. Pickett is gone. I wish him no ill will. I think that in Philly, he's got a much more talented supporting cast. I think Jalen Hurts, honestly, is overrated. I thought that he really took a step back last year, and the team did as well. And so you don't know what will happen there. But all I'm focusing on now is Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And one of the main differences, in my opinion, is I think Mike Tomlin had more say this offseason than he's ever had. With Kevin Colbert gone, with Ben Roethlisberger gone, with Art maybe, taking a step back and letting Khan and Waddle handle things even more, trusting them to do things with a modern approach. And I think they leaned on Mike Tomlin. And we've seen these last two drafts and these last two off seasons, I see a lot of improvements, a lot of things being handled differently. And I think that Tomlin's the one that said, I want Russell Wilson, and he's going to be the starter. And now whatever was said by Khan and them in the meetings, I think Tomlin's the one that said, no, this is what I want. And I think somebody has to. And I'd rather it be Mike Tomlin because he's going to be the one coaching these guys. He's going to be the one that is going to be, his winning record streak, his inability to win in the playoffs. Everything hinges on this. But they also went out and got a proven offensive coordinator. But they got a quarterback coach now. Is it Tom Arth? I think is his name. I mean, and he's impressing the quarterbacks. He's very attention to detail, and he's hands-on. Azani, the wide receiver coach, the wide receiver position has been undisciplined for a while now. And they haven't had anybody to put their foot down and say, this is what we're doing it. This is how we're going to do it. If you run it wrong, we're doing it again. All those kind of things. And he's a very intense coach, but it seems like he has the respect of all of the wide receivers on the depth chart. So I see so many positives there. And the biggest one, again, is finally committing to that offensive line. They picked up in one draft 3 starters because I believe that McCormick is going to be a starter sooner rather than later, as early as next year. Mm-hmm. Maybe this year with an injury, hopefully not. But they, Colbert did pick 3 guys that starters on the offensive line in a decade. And I think the Steelers just did 3 in one draft. So, you invest, make wise investments like that in the foundation, and it's going to show on the field.
I think so too. Now, there's some interesting things that you mentioned, and it brought up some things to think about. You are absolutely right when it comes to Mike Tomlin finally getting an opportunity probably to shape this team in the way that he wants it. He did have Kevin Colbert up till recently and Ben Roethlisberger, and both of those guys were members of the Pittsburgh Steelers before he was. So I can understand that. I don't want to say pecking order, but I can understand having being maybe perhaps having to share the responsibilities or the answers to the questions with those guys. But the Steelers have overall a couple of different positions as of recent. Started with the offensive line, and then it started again with the middle linebacker group. And then this past offseason, it's with the quarterback position. And I think that there's a huge reason as to why. I think that they were completely dissatisfied with everything that had occurred in those positions. I mean, they didn't go in and get a completely new offensive line and linebackers if they thought that the guys that were there before were what this team needed. Yep. And I think that's what's the next thing that came with the quarterback position. I think that we can blame Canada and all this other stuff as well, but given the fact that it was overhauled, I think that a huge component to why the Pittsburgh Steelers offense has been so poor, maybe in the last few years, has been because of the quarterback position. Obviously, also the offensive line, I think, has been a major component of that when you had, especially like in Ben Roethlisberger's final season. So I think that there has been a lot of bad there on the offensive side of things. Offensive coordinator, quarterback, line play hasn't been the greatest. Running back hasn't, lived up to possibly the expectations, like on statistically, I guess, because he's running less than 4 yards per carry, but he's also getting hit before he even gets a yard off the line of scrimmage. Yeah, there's been some need for this. And I think that when you look at this offense and where they are today and just where they were about 2 years ago, completely different. And I think that it's eventually going to work out, right? They continue to make things and change things. And I think they finally put the pieces right together. The biggest question, obviously, is going to be the quarterback position. But, I mean, you got a guy who's possibly a former, a guy that's possibly a Hall of Famer, a walking Hall of Famer, if he can do things in the right way in Russ. And you have a guy that has a lot of potential that could be the guy that has shown flashes. So I think the Steelers have given themselves an opportunity to maybe something will happen with one of those guys. But
I wholeheartedly agree with you about everything.
Mhm.
I was just thinking the other day, let's look at Kevin Colbert and the amount of good fortune that he'd had in the last decade, because his drafting was very poor. Villanueva, an Army tight end who becomes made a Pro Bowl actually at left tackle. Ramon Foster, who was undrafted, ended up being an 8-year starter. You had Pouncey that you got at the beginning of that decade, and you got David Castro who fell in your lap because everybody thought he was going to be gone much earlier. And then they've had a variety of right tackles. And they put together a line that was very cheap when you consider how much draft capital was spent on it. And then even in pay, because they paid Pouncey and they paid Castro, but the rest of them were pretty cheap. Fair market value. You get Le'Veon Bell in the second round, he was for a while was the best running back in football. Now, was that good fortune or was Colbert just that smart? You pick up AB in the 6th round, who was the best wide receiver in football for a while. Is that Colbert, or was he just did he get lucky there? I could keep going down the line, but he neglected that offensive line. Then you go and you look at, as you said, linebacker. He got really bad, and then they got Shazier, and he was a freakish talent. But after he went down, they tried to piecemeal that thing together every which way but loose, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And they brought in has-beens and never worse. And, in his big swinging, big attempt to fix it was Devin Bush, which was a massive mistake of monumental proportions, because you can't take an undersized linebacker and that has no heart and doesn't like contact. That doesn't work in any league. You can't do that in Canada. So I'm just saying that Colbert, his career was two separate entities. He was great at the front at the beginning, and then the second part, he got by with some good fortune. He had a franchise quarterback, one of the all-time best, that was a winner and willed them teams to win with, again, a lot of the wide receivers besides AB were cheap, your Nate Washingtons and your other guys that were either undrafted or, he picked them up off the scrap heap some of those years. Older guys that, had one more hurrah. But I'm saying that Colbert got carried just like other people got carried by what he had at the quarterback position. And the way it worked out with Bell and Brown and some of these stars that they've had. When that all went away, he was totally exposed. And I've noticed that Kahn is doing everything in his power to get rid of Colbert's guys on the roster. Guys that Colbert drafted are few and far between. And again, as you said, even about running back, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, both picks they could have had Creed Humphrey.
Mm-hmm.
That is just, to me, that was just arrogance. You drafted Harris in the first round. He never ran a 40. You're assuming how fast he is. But if you watch the tape, he didn't have that special gear that most first-round picks got to have now, because running backs are a dime a dozen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you take Pat Freiermuth, who was an undersized tight end that already had a little bit of a concussion history, and you take him over a guy who could be your next legacy center. So either it was incompetence or it was arrogance.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of probably maybe some of both. I think there was sticking to your old morals. I mean, you're absolutely right. When it came to Colbert, his attention to the offensive line hadn't really been there. I mean, in his entire tenure with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he never drafted a tackle in the first round.
Exactly.
And the first two drafts since his departure are tackle. And so I don't think that's a surprise. I do think that early on in his career, 100% he did great. But you're absolutely right. In the later part of his tenure with the Steelers, the picks weren't there. And it was like the Steelers were just, it was bad. It was bad. It was real bad. I mean, Kendrick Green as your center, as a starter, as a rookie, it just tells you how bad it is. Like, it was horrible. And so with that being said, Omar Khan has really turned it around. Now, I can't say that that's not just on Tomlin or Omar Khan. I think Andy Weidl has a huge component as far as where the Steelers have gone, what positions they've targeted, the type of players they've targeted. They've targeted some physical guys. When it comes, though, to Bell, I will say this. I think that was more the smart thing than anything, because at that time, Eddie Lacy was still on the board, and Eddie Lacy was the guy that a lot of people were thinking was the top running back in that draft. And a lot of guys were thinking that he would go to the Steelers just based on the fact that he was a bigger body running back, was a bruiser. Maybe reminded people of Jerome Bettis. And I mean, I'll be honest, I was surprised when they selected Le'Veon Bell in the second round. I'm glad they did. But I'll leave it that one at that. But Kevin Colbert, he's definitely struggled at the last end of his tenure. And I think that one thing that the Steelers have also done differently that's really, I think, going to help out this team is under Omar Khan, they're not afraid to admit a mistake. I think that with Kevin Colbert, Pickett would still be here. He'd have his fourth year he'd be here this year and next year as a starter. And there'd be a lot of other Green would probably be here still, and so on. So I'm really glad at the work that this team has done, and I really do see a lot of improvement, especially where it was needed. And I know a lot of people are looking at this team, and some say, I think I saw in the live chat, somebody said that they're a 7-win team. I don't buy it. I don't buy that at all. I think that this team is at worst going to stay at where they were at a 10-game winning season. I can't see anything less than that.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, with the title of the show, I'm like, we have hopes and dreams for this team. And I mean, I'm not hoping that Russell Wilson's going to return to his, MVP consideration for him that he had there for a few years. I just want him to do what he's done and, utilize that experience and that leadership and execute the play action pass and hit the open guy when they're there and see the open guy when they're there. Go through your reads and your progressions, things that have been missed in recent seasons. If he just does those small things, and it can be like, we remember when Ben was a rookie, he made 2 to 4 game-changing plays every game. It wasn't like he was lighting the league on fire, putting up, these huge numbers, but he made those big game-winning money plays. And I think that Russell Wilson will flourish in this. I think he has the ability to make that play when it's there. Not asking him to do anything superhuman. He's not going to throw off a 300-pound guy and, lumber around a little bit and then throw a 50-yard pass down the middle for a touchdown. That's not Russell Wilson. I'm not asking him to do that. I'm just asking him to hit the play when it's there. Because that's what that's what Mason Rudolph did.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it that whole end of the year, and when he was playing so well, he just made the plays that were available. That's something that hadn't happened all year, for a couple of years, and that's what I want Russell Wilson to do: is just make the plays that are available. And I think the Steelers will be a better team.
I did too. I mean, Arthur Smith got the best out of Ryan Tannehill. And I get it; he didn't get the best out of the quarterbacks that he had in Atlanta. However, I don't think he really had the best group of quarterbacks there as well. In fact, their current head coach has stated if they had a better quarterback room last year, he wouldn't have a job. And so, that's exactly what he said. And so, I do think that this year, what he can do with Russ, I think would be great. I mean, how bad do you think those Bronco fans are going to feel when Bo Nix struggles to win 3 games and Russell Wilson has himself a year? Because I think that there's more than likely, I think there's a better chance for Russ to have a better year, 10, 11 win game season than Bo Nix winning more than 7 games.
I'm seeing some comments in our thread of some people that are obviously still have some ill feelings towards Russ. Some Broncos fans. But here's the thing we got to ask. And let's just be honest. When I seen Kenny Pickett, Trubisky, whoever in the offense, Matt Canada's offense, you could tell it was incompetent. And there was no relationship there. There was no trust. The players didn't trust the plays that were being called or sent in. Okay, let's look at last year with Denver and Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. You could tell that Sean Payton just did not like Russell Wilson. He didn't want to talk to him when he came off the field. He avoided him. It was like they were two guys just, that obviously were established, proven guys. Peyton had won the Super Bowl. Had been very successful. Wilson has won a Super Bowl. But they had no connection, no chemistry. And we know that quarterback success, it depends a lot on that relationship with that head coach. There's a trust factor there. That head coach is willing to have faith and call things because he trusts the quarterback to make the right read, to make the right play, and not to, leave him hanging out there. I mean, say what you want about that terrible play at the end of the Super Bowl, but the Seahawks believed that Wilson was going to make the right play. He would hit the pass and they'd win the Super Bowl. It was a bad call, but still, there was that trust factor. I think that the biggest difference for Russell Wilson this year will be his relationship with Mike Tomlin.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have a point there. I mean, last year, like you said, Payton didn't want him. Sean Payton didn't want him. Hankett, the coach that was there before, I think that was all in efforts to get Aaron Rodgers. So I'm not entirely sure Russell Wilson was quarterback number 1 in his mind when he took the position there with the Denver Broncos. And his last couple of years there in Seattle, I mean, I don't think it was a secret that Carroll was ready to move on from Russ. So, he hasn't been in a situation where the head coach has fallen all in on him in a while.
Yeah.
And so I think that, Mike Tomlin is definitely a guy that can get the best out of his players, get the best out of anybody. I mean, the way he goes out there and just kind of motivates people, I'm ready to run through a wall for him. So I think he's going to get the best out of Russ. And, I mean, are we to expect, second or third year Russell Wilson in the season? Probably not. But I think we can expect a more mature, smart decision-making quarterback with a lot of special weapons around him that is going to make his job a lot easier.
And like Mason Rudolph, Russell Wilson throws a great deep ball.
Yes.
And he's got guys that can capitalize on his ability to throw the deep ball. And I think he actually has an offensive line in front of him and that will improve as the year goes on. That'll give him an opportunity to have time to throw the deep ball. So all things considered, I just think this will be a better team than what we've seen in the past. One thing I did want to mention, you mentioned Tannehill. Tannehill was drafted and by the Dolphins and he didn't pan out. They were using him as wide receiver because he was considered more athlete than quarterback. Who does that sound like? Somebody on the Steelers, maybe Fields. But he gets with Arthur Smith And they have one of the top 3 offenses in the NFL for a couple of years. Now, I know a lot of it was Derrick Henry, but Tannehill became a above average starting quarterback. So who's to say that Arthur Smith can't have similar success in Pittsburgh?
True story. True story. And unlike the Tennessee Titans of them, the Steelers have an amazing defense. I think this defense is probably going to be ranked at the end of the season, as long as everybody stays healthy, in the top 5, easy.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, they have an opportunity, if everything goes well and everybody can stay healthy, I think, to be one of those defenses that were like the 2010 to 2008 Steelers that made it all the way. The offense obviously is going to be a huge question mark. The offense wasn't as much of a question mark back then, but I don't think the defense has very many question marks right now. And I fully intend that this team's going to be very strong. And if the offense can pull in their weight and keep the defense off the field, a respectable amount of time, it doesn't even have to be like an amazing stat there, just a normal average stat. I see this team doing a lot of damage. I really do. And
if the Steelers, the hopes and dreams, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, if these guys, these avatars at cornerback, Dante Jackson, even down to Beanie Bishop, I've been begging for years to improve the speed, the team speed. Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, and then all the secondary guys, Deshaun Elliott. If we really step back and look, this is athletically as talented a defense the Steelers have had, as you say, in a long time. And a lot of the weaknesses they had was the middle of the field, or they always had somebody out there that was the weak link, whether it be Robert Spillane or Levi Wallace last year. There was always a weak link. Keanu Neal was a weak link. They've upgraded all the positions. I don't know if they're going to be a weak link now. And they've still been a good defense. Imagine if you take away the freebies, the free 7-8 yard passes that are automatic completions. You take that away, what's team's going to do?
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, we're hitting about the 50-minute mark here. Do you have any final words for everybody, Shannon, before we call it quits? What do you think? Before we do, I mean, it's hopes and dreams. What do you think is the hope of the record of the Pittsburgh Steelers? Where do you realistically see them at? I say they win 10 games. It's a hard season. It's a hard schedule. I don't know if I can put more than 11 games in the win column this year for the Steelers, but what's your prediction right now? Way too early.
Yeah, when we tried to do a little prediction show, and I come in at 11-6.
11-6.
But 10-7 is very possible. Again, because it is the toughest schedule. Well, everybody in the AFC North has the toughest schedules. Some a little more than others, of course, but it's going to be a survival of the fittest this year. And then to come down to the last, who's going to have health going into the playoffs? Because when you play the brutal AFC North matchups back-to-back weeks, and you throw a Chiefs game in there, it's going to be brutal. So it's going to take some good fortune, some good health. But I want to see something I haven't seen in a while. I want to see a Steelers team improving as the year goes on. Not so much record-wise, but actual execution, chemistry, performance on the field that gives us hope for the future. Well, the Steelers have resisted rebuilding for a long time. They didn't even want to use the word. Well, now they're fully committed and they're right in the middle of it, maybe on the backside of it. So I want to see that. So that'll show that this team, if they're not ready this year because of all the new faces and it's like a half of them's a new team when you count the coaches too. But that next year in 2025, that this team is truly rebuilt, a contender, no doubt, and ready to compete for a Super Bowl. So there's a few things I want to see this year that to me is even more important than the record.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, this is going to be a hard schedule. regardless
Yeah.
how you look at it. I do think that this team is very much capable of winning 10 plus games and getting into the playoffs as long as everybody stays healthy and they do what they're supposed to do. I cannot see this offense going anywhere worse than they were last year. This has to go in a different direction, whether you're just looking at the improvements at the quarterback position or the improvements at the offensive coordinator position. There is no way that this offense is going to go backwards. So we should expect better from them. We should expect more time of possession with them, which would alleviate some of the injuries that the Steelers defense had been having. And I think overall, this team should be a better team this year, and it'll have a better opportunity for some, to compete in the playoffs. Because I do think that at the end of the day, it might be a hope, might be a dream, but I do think the Steelers make it back to the playoffs, and I do think that they're going to have a better chance of winning versus what they had here recently.
Well, you said the key, time of possession.
Yeah.
Because if you control that time of possession and you extend drives and you put some kind of points on the board, you're in most games, and you keep the more explosive offenses off the field and give your defense more rest. So as we've seen, that time of possession is going to be critical.
It definitely is. Well, I want to thank everybody that's tuned in. We'll be back tomorrow night with the Big Brosco Show. You don't want to miss it. And then pump your brakes on Wednesday with Shannon White and the homies. So until next time, guys, we'll see you later. Shannon, take us out.